In this video, I'm going to be having a look at what's next for Warcry. And to provide bang for your buck, I'm going to be breaking this down into 3 key chunks. What we know, what's very likely, and my favourite, speculation. Speaking of speculation, they've snuck a little hint for the Fleshy Quartz turning up at some point into the Sundered Fate book, which is pretty exciting. Anyway, let's go check this all out. So hello, I'm David, this is HobbyJackal, and let's start by diving in and having a look at what we know is coming for Warcry. So here's my updated Warcry Roadmap for 2022-23. So of course at this point we've got a much better idea of what to expect as we are halfway into this season of Warcry. Starting with the Heart of Ghur box set, which released alongside the Centaurian Marshal and the Chaos Legionnaires, as well as a compendium which also appeared for free back in August 2022. We then received our core book separately in October 2022. Then we got Sundered Fate, released alongside the scenery from the Heart of Ghur box set, a load of dice, if that's your thing. The original Warcry warbands repacked, the original Warcry monsters repacked, the Rotmire Creed, the Horns of Ashut, and the Rotten Ruin book also from the Heart of Ghur box set. And all of this dropped with a pre-order in November, but just landed in December 2022, falling slightly shy of their intention to release these every 3 months. So the other things we know for sure are that the Bloodhunt is going to be the next expansion, coming approximately 3 months after Sundered Fate, followed by Nightmare Quest 3 months after that. Now both of these will contain some scenery and 2 brand new warbands. We have been told this by Warhammer community. Right, before we get on to the interesting stuff, here's a quick plug for the channel. If you like the video, please do like. It's free and it really helps me. If you want to see more stuff from me, then do feel free to hit subscribe. No pressure on that front, and the next video is going to be focusing on the Sundered Fate box set. A little bit more of that on this video though as well. Finally, if you are planning on buying hobby supplies and you like 20% off, Firestorm Games have offered me an affiliate link. It means they'll chuck me a little bit of dosh every time that you buy something through that link, but you still get the 20% off. So, you know, it helps me to do physical reviews like the Sundered Fate dealie. Right, on with the show. Let's have a look at what's very likely to happen next. Right, so these have entered the very likely section. I've put the dates down on Bloodhunt and Nightmare Quest. Bloodhunt should hit in February, potentially March, just because Sundered Fate crept into December this year, with Nightmare Quest falling around May, June. Alongside those, I think it's very likely that we're going to see a Warcry annual, and this has previously taken on the name of Tome of Champions. Now, I slapped it down there before Bloodhunt. Traditionally, these did arrive around the end of the year and would be dated with that year. However, we do have a different release schedule to what we've had before, with releases coming thick and fast, so it might be that this will arrive more towards the end of the 22-23 Warcry releases, potentially after Nightmare Quest. As you can see, just looking at what exists on the roadmap already, it's very likely that we're going to get a separate release of the Jade Obelisk and the Hunters of Huanchi from the Sundered Fate box, alongside the Bloodhunt release. We'd expect these to be accompanied by the book Stealth and Stone and also the scenery, with rules for that specific scenery appearing in the Stealth and Stone book. Of course, we can expect this to be repeated again for Nightmare Quest for the contents of Bloodhunt. And again, in line with Kill Team and what we've seen there, it's reasonable to expect that another season will start anew around August 2023, at which point presumably you'll be able to separately buy the contents of the Nightmare Quest box. It's worth noting that in the Warhammer community articles, they did always say this would be the release schedule, but there would be more. And given how much repackaged stuff arrived alongside Sundered Fate in December, it doesn't seem completely out there that we might see a few more things along the way, with a little bit more on what we might expect there later in this video. Right, so that just about brings you up to speed with where we are and where we're heading. Now it's time for the good stuff, my favourite, speculation. So we have the names of the next 2 expansions, Bloodhunt and Nightmare Quest. But there's 4 other elements that I'm going to consider here to help us make some reasonable guesses as to what might turn up next. Finally, pinch of salt warning, this is complete speculation and it could always just be completely blimmin' random what turns up next. Just look at Kill Team Shadow Vaults. That contained Kazakin and Necrons. I mean, who's going to be guessing that from the name? Right, the 4 things. Firstly, the map. Appearing in the Warcry core book and the Rotten Ruin book, it's always contained some vague hints of what we're going to see, both from a narrative perspective and the icons that litter the map. Now, it does also appear in the Sundered Fate book, albeit with a slightly edited and updated version. And this isn't only updates for the warbands featured in the book. There is a brand new little icon down in the corner, which is called the Uskirgen Bone Monasteries. Sounding a bit fleshy to quartz, if you ask me. Next to the 4 things, we have the narrative. Now, the narrative has heavily hinted towards Seraphon being involved here. Seraphon have appeared. We'll take another look at what else is in the books. Thirdly is fan theory patterns. So from early on there was a suggestion that each of the Chaos Gods would feature in Warcry, and another pattern, probably based in part from Warhammer community saying, you know, this isn't all going to be Chaos this time around, is that we're going to see at least a warband from each of the Grand Alliances. Not only are these two patterns not mutually exclusive, but the releases so far have not proven them wrong. Finally, the fourth thing I will look at is the Age of Sigmar release schedule. Now, whilst things don't always align, it seems reasonable to expect that a couple of these warbands may align with the releases that are coming for Age of Sigmar. And we're at a point in this edition where we can make some really good guesses as to what's turning up in spring 2023. Right, in making my predictions, I'm going to jump between the four things I've just mentioned there. Let's dive in. Right, let's start by taking a proper gander at that map. So here's what we had in the Warcry core book, and also in the Warband tome that came in the Heart of Ghur box set, Rotten Ruin. Now there are some nice links to things that have come, including the Skinstoff Fen linking to the Rotmire Creed, and the Weird Lights playing very much into the Jade Obelisk. Additionally, Ventalek's path was supposed to lead pretty much to where Talaxis or the Eye of Chotek resided, which was a Seraphon Void ship suggesting that they'd make their appearance at some point. Now the Stealth and Stone book, which arrived with Sundered Fate, gives us this map. Now you'll note there's lots of similarities here, and of course we've got some additions linked to the narrative unveiled in the Sundered Fate box, including Motzalpota's Gaze, and that's the slam that was in charge of the Eye of Chotek, the Sundered Scales, which are significant chunks of the crashed Void ship sticking up out of the forest, and the Pillars of Jade, which is something the Jade Obelisk raise, while simultaneously tearing down and defacing statues of other civilizations. The most interesting addition of all, of course, is the Eskurgan Bone Monasteries, which interestingly enough does appear next to the Blood Mad Ravage, a Khorne symbol, and as I've mentioned, there are suggestions that perhaps each of the four main Chaos Gods
out of the way, you!
might appear across these boxes. I mean, there's 4 boxes coming, it doesn't seem like that much of a reach. But worth noting that Slaanesh's symbol does not appear on this map, even in this edited version. On the Flesh Eater Court, or Feck side, we have had plenty of rumour engines landing, which do certainly look like they bear the Flesh Eater Court's aesthetics. And given that their faction scenery is a bone throne and their whole background is that they are crazed, vicious, deranged, wretched monsters covered in foul blood that actually believe they're on these honourable quests, the Bone Monasteries does very much sound like it's going to be them that are rocking about down there. Now, of course, the next box set is called Bloodhunt, which could easily tie these two factions together. Although it is worth noting that the one that follows is called Nightmare Quest, which itself sounds notably Flesh Eater Courts orientated. Now, this isn't a bad time to check out the Age of Sigmar release roadmap. So we have Slaves to Darkness, we've got Beast of Chaos and Gloomspite Gitz arriving in winter. There may still be some releases to be seen for the Beasts or for Gloomspite, particularly the latter, as it's arriving later and it's already sort of broken that tradition of just having a single new character in the book, as we've seen a whole new unit released in the Snarlfang Riders as well as an Underworlds warband. Sadly, my hopes of Spider Riders being released as part of Warcry do seem to be nixed a little bit by an inclusion of a passage in the Sundered Fate accompanying book. The Spinecrawler webs, which feature the symbol of a spider, now describing the infamous spinecrawlers as web-spinning arthropods with 1,000 segmented legs that like to attach themselves to the back of their victims, burrowing through armour and flesh to extract the marrow from their bones. Not sounding a huge amount like these are going to be ridden by goblins, but you never know. Could be aligned and the spider symbol's still there. Given that generally speaking the models are designed before the rules and narrative are written though, I feel like they would have done something a little bit more hinting towards greenskin mischief there. So again, looking at this roadmap, we know that the Warcry expansions land at the very start and end of the spring period. And whilst it's not a given, it does seem like good practice try and link releases and units that are needed for Age of Sigmar with Warcry where possible. For example, the Chameleon Skinks were very much in need of an update, and the Horns of Ashut and the Centaurian Marshal did manage to make their way into the Slaves of Darkness book. It's not a given, however, and here's looking at you, Rotmire Creed and the Jade Obelisk. With that in mind, let's take a look at what's coming next for Age of Sigmar. So we've got 2 battle tomes for Order, and there's only a handful of tomes not yet released for this edition. We've got Seraphon, which, I mean, come on, the Chameleon Skinks have just landed. There's loads of rumour engines out there. I feel like these are probably going to be the first of those 2 to arrive in spring. There's also Kharadron Overlords and the Cities of Sigmar, or rather, the Dawnbringer Crusades update to the range. Now, I think it's anybody's guess if this is going to be Kharadron or Cities of Sigmar in summer, and I'm certainly excited to see what the Dawnbringers bring. But this isn't an Age of Sigmar video, I'm going to skip over to what we can expect for Chaos. Now, interestingly, given my conversation earlier, one of these 2 is going to be Blades of Khorne. with the other being Hedonites of Slaanesh. Now, if the rumour gurus are right and one warband for each of the main Chaos Gods is going to arrive, then Khorne and Slaanesh are looking likely, and it might just align that they will fit neatly into their Battletomes. I still do think it's slightly odd that Slaanesh isn't appearing on that map, however, especially given that they've made some additions to it which weren't linked to the latest book. Finally, for Death, we've got, well, hey, it's Flesh Eater Courts. Yeah, you know my feelings on these guys. I think they're almost a shoe-in for Warcry. But there are also the Ossiarch Bone Reapers who are waiting for their tome in this edition, and kind of in grey there, the Soulblight Gravelords, because they had an edition right at the cusp of the current edition of Warhammer, and it's reasonable to suggest that their Battletome was made with this in mind, so they may not be one of these two tomes that are going to arrive soon. So let's throw caution to the wind and just assume that Blades of Khorne and Hedonites of Slaanesh are going to be arriving with each of these next two expansion boxes. And let's say on that same assumption that we're going to be getting something for Order, something for Death, and something for Destruction. So we've had Order covered already by the Seraphon. I do think it's very likely that Khorne and Flesh Eater Courts are going to turn up, so it does leave a big question mark over Destruction. Now this is where something like the Spider Riders would work really well, because it's just an updated kit that would slot into people that were hoping to build up the Gloomspite armies, and there is still time for them to drop that out there before the book appears. It might be featured in there. And if we take a look back at the map for Destruction, we can see the Spinecrawler webs. Again, the creatures that are described there aren't sounding super Gloomspite, but who knows. There is the Great Stinkhorn. There's a moon symbol, really heavily linked to Gloomspite Gits, and Stinkhorn is a type of fungus. The other icon, which looks Destruction-y, is of course the Eater Pits. It's described as an ogre stronghold, and I would absolutely love to see some man-eaters appear in Warcry. They're mercenaries, they're armed with all sorts of different bits of kit, and they're packaged with a load of Gnobblers, so they would actually make a really good Warcry warband because they still have those numbers, and it would be great to see a Warcry warband that looks a bit different. It's made up of these bigger, chunkier guys and gals. So let's throw caution to the wind and say we're going to get a Blade of Khorne versus Gloomspite Gits box arriving for Bloodhunt, and a Hedonites of Slaanesh versus a Flesh Eater Courts arriving for Nightmare Quest. So the fourth thing I did mention was the narrative. So in the book originally we did have hints that Tzeentch had actually brought down the Void Ship in the first place, as well as the weird lights featuring and the Tzeentch symbol appearing on the map. Seraphon were heavily hinted at, and to be honest there's nothing super new in the narrative text for Sundered Fate that's making me think that another particular faction is a shoo-in at this point. The only thing that's really worth noting is that Honorio Ventalax, the chap who did the initial expedition that got past the Chameleon Skinks and made it back out alive into society to spread the word about the Eye of Chotek before going back in on another failed mission and just like disappearing. The camp's been found, his journal's been found. Didn't sound like it ended well, but the narrative does keep on hinting back that he's either dead or something worse. So I wouldn't be super surprised if something linked to Ventalax does appear in future, and whether that might be that he was pulled into a Flesh Eater Court style faction and somehow survived and became one of them, or something worse. I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see though. I'm going to finish off this video by touching upon an email I received before the release of Sundered Fate, coming up with some really interesting theories linked to the map and the release schedule. Now this email came from Giacomo Rilievo. Sorry if I'm pronouncing that terribly. And they summarised that the map has 16 icons and suggest it might be that we're getting 3 warbands plus a big ally per box set. Now this was sent before the Sundered Fate release, before we knew that we were getting loads of repackaged stuff from the first edition of Warcry. Now I think it's worth still mentioning here because we might be seeing a couple of extra warbands scattered across the next couple of releases, especially as there's not much to touch upon from the previous Warcry releases now that everything else has landed. The further suggestion in the email was that some factions have multiple icons. Now again, this was the version before the updated Sundered Fate map, but it still is an interesting place to go for inspiration. And the suggestion in the email was that if you take away the Chaos Alliance, which already has the Centaurian Marshal, you can look at the similar icons that appear for Soulblight Gravelords, the Gloomspite having 2 symbols and Stormcast having 2 icons. It feels unlikely that they would get multiple warbands, but it does suggest that maybe they would be the themed factions for another big ally for that Grand Alliance. And they suggest they'd love the idea of a giant tame spider for Gloomspite or Destruction. And they go on to note that with the first wave of releases for Heart of Ghur, a warband appeared alongside a big ally which was linked to them, and that's the Chaos Legionnaires and the Centaurian Marshal, and to be honest, still think this is possible. We don't know what we're going to be getting alongside those last couple of boxes, and it does feel like they have a lot to potentially release for Warcry, because they've chucked all that other stuff all alongside Sundered Fate. finally noting that potentially the skull icon that appears on the map could be a hint to where a large ally may appear. So Giacomo, thank you very much for the submission. I think it sounds absolutely great, and I'd completely forgot about the large Warcry allies that featured in the first edition, even though the Centaurian Marshal landed not long ago. I think it's a fantastic idea that we will see one of those each for each of the Grand Alliances, and there are some gaps on the upcoming roadmap that do need to be filled with more releases if they're going to hit this fairly continuous schedule that they're hitting at the moment. I think it sounds really interesting, and I'd love to hear all of your thoughts in the comments. As previously mentioned, in my next video, unless anything super exciting pops up on Warhammer community in the interim, I will be digging into Sundered Fate. I'm probably not dunking anything in Trifle like I did with the bloody last one, because that was a right nightmare to clean up. As well as pulling out the contents and reviewing it, I will be breaking it down into whether this box set is good for you if you're an existing player who's got the Heart of Ghur box set, whether you're a seasoned Warcry player who hasn't yet dipped their toe into the second edition releases, or whether you're brand new to the game, and what you can add to this box set to make it work for you. Until then, thank you very much for watching. Cheers!